wasn't right. And I'm standing here saying, why should I risk my personal and political and professional reputation? Why should I bother standing here? Why not keep quiet? Why not keep my head down and say nothing? And I've thought long and hard about this decision, and I'm proud to be here. I'm a member of a political party called A2. And I wouldn't be involved in any aspect of politics if I didn't care about this town, if I didn't care about my country. And the other reason I'm here is because I believe in the fundamental human rights and dignity of every person from conception to natural death. So, and like my own family, the party that I'm a member of, are divided over this. You're all, I'm sure, having conflict with your families and with your friends. We're all there, and you're trying to make sense of what's going on. And I've listened with interest to the people who spoke here earlier on today. Now, they're saying things I know nothing about, but what I do know about is what's happening to the health and well-being of the people of this town. And as some of you may know, I've worked as a doctor in Derry now for 35 years. And it's like the blink of an eye. I worked mainly as a GP down in Chantallow. And after, over the last months, as I say, at the beginning, like everybody else, when the WHO declared this pandemic, at that stage there were 4,291 deaths, which is one death for every 1.8 million people on the planet. So at this stage, even that early on, you're sort of going, this is big. And at the beginning, I was terrified, not particularly of the disease, but of the whole surreal atmosphere where we were all locked up and you couldn't look at people and everybody was jumping, out of the way and you sort of go, there's something enormous going on here. And then, and the media, day after day, hour after hour, every news bulletin, every chat show, every media headline was death, misery porn, more death, with no analysis, no sort of context at all. And we also know that the graphs from across Europe in those early weeks all showed very, very similar things. There was a big steep rise in excess deaths, and then it went back to normal over the next 8 weeks or so, and this kind of was uniform all over the place. So it seems that this was a very contagious infection, but its effects were fairly short-lived, and it overwhelmingly harmed the very, very old and the frail. And the governments, I understand, at the beginning, I never approved of a lockdown, but I thought that something, you could see that governments were panicked and had to be doing something. I first became very concerned as a medical practitioner when I heard that for the first time in my professional career they had changed the rules around death certification, which meant that this couldn't be compared to anything which had gone before. All of the records that had gone before were now it was in a different framework. And the rules were that anybody who had a temperature or who had a cough prior to their death, no matter what else was wrong with them, was to be counted as a COVID death. And to me that was fundamentally dishonest.
Criminal.
And I'm strangely confused that my profession, by and large, went along with that. We all got an email that this was mandatory, that, and people who die, cough, and have respiratory infections, that's the end stage for most people, no matter what else is wrong with them. So I went back then, I volunteered, because again I thought, don't worry about it, I bring these things and then I ignore them. So I went back, I wrote it in the hall cupboard and got my stethoscope and went back to work. And because I thought the NHS was going to be overwhelmed, because that's what we were told in every news bulletin, and they were building Nightingale hospitals and all of this was going on. And very early on in my return to work, I worked a shift in the GP Assessment COVID Centre in Altnagalvin Hospital. And during that shift, there were 15 members of staff. There were 3 doctors, about 9 nurses, several admin staff, and we sat there and we saw 3 people. none of whom had COVID. But if they'd had COVID, we couldn't have told them anyway because we'd no tests. And I didn't work there regularly, but the doctors that did work there told me that they watched Netflix and that they brought their knitting and that they caught up on paperwork and that, yeah, it didn't make a lot of sense, but that was what the Department of Health told them to do. So, meantime, this GP COVID assessment centre was located in the main outpatients of Galvin Area Hospital, which is one of the busiest outpatient departments that I don't know that many of them, but it's, one of the busiest outpatient departments you could get. There's a throughput of a couple of hundred people every day. These are people looking for cancer diagnosis, looking for review of their heart disease, looking for stroke prevention, looking for treatment for inflammatory diseases, for connective tissue diseases, for arthritis. All of the things that a hospital does, all cancelled. Nothing. No cancer screening, no cervical cancer screening, no breast cancer screening, no prostate cancer screening and meantime...
It's called genocide. Murder! Justice!
Then at around the same time, we saw sick and frail and elderly patients taken from hospital wards that were not operating at capacity and shoved into the care home sector. GPs did not visit, and there was no expectation that if their condition deteriorated, that they would be admitted to hospital for medical care. And it's incredible. The staff, I've spoken to some of them, and they were traumatised by what they had to do. These are people who are not trained in palliative care, and very often they didn't have adequate PPE, and they were absolutely petrified, and they watched those people dying alone without their loved ones, without their spiritual directors, and what happened was barbarity, and there's no other word I can use to describe it. This care home scandal happened in lockstep in every country across Europe.
Yes.
Even the Swedes made that mistake where they didn't have a lockdown, but still at least half of their fatalities were in the care home sector. So, and I see that Dr. Marcus de Bruin, who's very bravely been speaking out about this right from the beginning, and he resigned a very prestigious post because he objected to what was happening, and he has now been hauled before the Irish Medical Council for some sort of an investigation. And although what I've been saying is much less in your face and just my opinion, I've had an email from the General Medical Council as well, because they didn't like an article that I wrote in one of the newspapers comparing wearing masks to keep out a virus to using a sheep fence to keep out mosquitoes. In the hospitals then, everyone over 65 was written up for palliative care drugs. And again, this was the expectation that older people weren't going to have standard medical care, that they were simply being, generically treated. Now, again, because the system never was at any time overwhelmed. On the 13th of May, the British Medical Journal published an article which showed that only a third of the excess deaths in the community in England and Wales were attributable to COVID. So 2 out of 3 deaths were down to the lockup. Shame on our governments and shame on the scientists who directed this policy, and shame on our health service administrators who implemented them. So, in the GP out of hours centre now, because GP surgeries, as many of you'll know, are not really functioning, it seems to be left up to each surgery to decide what they do, and many of them have decided that the risk of seeing people who are in danger and who are sick and who are frightened because of their sort of fear of contagion, that they're not happy to see and assess these people despite being paid, and they have contracts which said they should do so. So I'm working in the GP out of Irish Centre, and as I say, we're seeing people who are presenting much later who've tried and couldn't get help from their usual providers, and who very often are very ill and you know, are in a much worse clinical condition than they would have been otherwise. At home, and I have to shout out here for the Marie Curie Nursing Service, who have been in the thick of the worst of all this, visiting people at home, assessing them, providing death with dignity for people who were too terrified to go into hospitals where they would be left among strangers and not have their loved ones around them in their final days and have no farewells to say. So when you go to visit somebody, you know, particularly a few months ago, the first thing they say is, "Doctor, please do not send me to the hospital." And the Marie Curie nurses were stepping in there and the other thing, of course, is the mental health of the people of this town and right across the country and indeed across the world as far as we know. We know that the numbers of suicides, the numbers of mental health crises, domestic violence, drug and alcohol related harm, all of these things are spiralling. In one shift in Great James's Street Health Centre, a colleague told me as I was coming on shift, he said he had dealt with 6 suicidal people in the previous shift, and that is not atypical. And I've heard, and I haven't been able to confirm this, but I've heard that 20 of our people in the last month have taken their own lives, have put their hands in their own lives. You know, look at the young people. God Almighty, I remember my last couple of months at Thornhill when I did my A-levels. You know, that spring, your whole life in front of you, and, you know, your friends and your exams and the excitement and the spring weather and out in the evenings, all taken from them, stolen from them for no reason. And then you look at people now who are unsure about their jobs. We know that there's going to be a recession, the like of which we have not seen before. In the 6 counties, the COVID response has cost £2 billion. Now that would go a long way to relieving the homeless problem we have, and poverty and the whole welfare system, you know, and this has to be paid for. And I'm here because I'm a mother, because I have grandchildren, and because I can see that unless this lunacy stops, our children and grandchildren are going to suffer for generations.
We're going to stop it!
And of course the people who are doing this to us, the people who are writing the rules, we've seen them. Leo Varadkar romping in his shorts in the Phoenix Park. Travelling the country to get his eyes tested. Neil Ferguson, the boy whose mathematics wouldn't get him a GCSE.
Golf kit! Golf kit! Golf kit!
He had his lover visiting him right at the height of the pandemic that he told the people of the UK was going to kill 1 million people. Now, after all that, I'm going to calm down. I've good news for you. The mortality figures from COVID are being re-examined and adjusted downwards across the globe.
Woo!
The CDC in America have looked at their figures and reckon only 6%.
Woo!
In Italy, the figure was 12%. In the Republic of Ireland, Dr. Holohan admitted that only 600 out of the 1,700 deaths were COVID. 970 of the deaths were in the care home sector, and we've talked about that, which means that in a country of 5 million souls, 200 people died of COVID. All of them. There's more good news. The number of deaths worldwide, I checked this yesterday on the computer, and so it's 873,882 across the planet. That's a huge number of people. And my sympathies go out to all of their families and all of their friends and all of the people who are bereaved. But in the world population of 7,809,555,140 43 as of 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Your chance of dying from COVID is 0.0112%. And this is, of course, much lower if you're under 80 and don't have 2 or 3 other very serious things wrong with you, such as strokes and heart disease and all the rest. So people, be of good cheer. We're all going to get through this. More good news, not one single healthy child has died of COVID in the UK. At the end of August, last week, week 33, the total number of deaths is below the 5-year average, and has been below the 5-year average since the 5th of June. This is good news. Have any of you seen it in any of the newspapers or any of the media?
No.
The other bit of good news, no. I would like this good news communicated to our governments, to our health managers and to our media. And more importantly, would somebody tell these people that those 7.75 billion people don't need vaccinated? Especially, now I'm a doctor and I have some scientific training, and as I say, I've listened carefully to things that other people were saying here today. I am not against vaccines. I have given vaccines. I have persuaded people to have their children vaccinated, rightly or wrongly. But what I do not want is a vaccine that there's no need for, that will not be tested, that will be rushed through, and using totally new technology which has not been used before. So I'm going to finish now by making 4 statements. I promise I'll finish very soon. Okay? And I don't know what the answers to these questions are, but I just want you to think about these and do a bit of research. The first one is, the global response to COVID was directed at every stage by the World Health Organization. The chief funder of the World Health Organization, until recently second only to the US government, and who gives more money than the total given from Canada, Germany, France, there's a list of countries, is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And they fund many of the research institutes also where the wildly over-exaggerated and erroneous modelling figures came from. The person in the world who is most vocal about the need for vaccination is Bill Gates, and he is likely to make incredible profits from the billions upon billions he has invested in vaccine development.
Children not for sale.
And the big pharmaceutical transnational companies will not be required to provide indemnity for harm from these. The indemnity will be taken over by our governments. And do you know who our governments are?
Scumbag.
It's us. I also predict that there will be no second wave. Viruses, in order to replicate, require living organisms. They can only have babies inside cells that are alive. So that a very virulent virus will kill its host and die itself. So that you can see, this is the way viruses have always behaved. They increase and they arrive, they increase in virulence, and then they burn themselves out. And the graphs, as I say, have shown this now, where this thing is clinically irrelevant. And in fact, it's so irrelevant that you need a test to know that you have it.
Yeah.
And the other thing I will predict is that there will be a test-demic. And we can see this happening already as a pretext to lock us up again. I mean, the other thing that I think is important, that I would love more than anything else, and I talked earlier on about my professional reputation and I would love to be wrong about all of this. There's nothing I would love. I would take the humiliation and the everything else that would go with it if I was mistaken in this, but all of the evidence points to the fact that humanity is, I think, at a very dangerous and a very frightening time. And I'm not frightened of any disease, but I'm frightened of where this is all taking us. So I'm going to leave you now. Just have to check, was there anything really, really important that I forgot to say? But probably not. Oh, the other thing I just wanted to say is in recent times, we've heard both Mr. Gates and Dr. Tedros, who's in charge of the World Health Organization, who's not a doctor, and they said very clearly that even with a vaccine, this won't be over. So that we can see that this is not really about health, because these people we know have not got the health and well-being of the poor and the dispossessed of the world at heart. So this is about something bigger. And again, I have more questions than answers. I don't know what goes on in these people's heads, thank God. But I think we should be afraid. Before I leave you, I'm going to echo what other people have said today. We are the many, they are the few. And I firmly believe in the resilience of the human spirit.
Yes.
And I do believe that we can change the course of world history.
We can.
And
We will!
It starts here with each one of us. So have courage, connect with people, and let's hope that we can make the world a better place.